Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I got asked a question the other day that I thought was a good one, and a viewer wanted to know what is my favorite piece of structure to fish? Like, if I could fish one thing, what would it be that I could fish? And as much as I feel like there is one thing, as I sat down and thought about it, there's too many than just one piece of structure, and a lot of that varies based on the type of water that I'm fishing, whether it's a natural body of water, maybe it's a lowland impoundment, a highland impoundment, maybe it's a river. It changes. So what I figured I would do is give you like my five favorite targets. These are the five things that if I see driving down the lake, I have a hard time not stopping and fishing because they can be just that good, and they can be that type of target where you only got to pull in, make a couple of casts, and either you get bit or you don't, and you can move on. So I figured I would do this. It was kind of entertaining to think about this. It really sent me off in one of these spirals where I sit and think about it for a while, and next thing you know, I've got a list of like 30 different pieces of structure. But I figured I'd give you like the five that are excellent places to stop, but they're also, for me, they're like my favorite targets to fish just because of how good they can be for me and based on my experience. So the first piece of structure that is really hard for me to pass up is an isolated dock. If I'm on a lake that either has a ton of docks and I find, say, a cove or a shoreline where there's one random dock on it, I generally want to stop and fish that. The same goes for a lake where you don't have many docks at all, but there's one scattered dock here, one scattered dock there. Those isolated docks, regardless of whether they're a floating dock or a pole dock, they're just bass magnets almost all year long. Those can be really specific places that the fish congregate around. They really use it as a home base. That's how I would describe it. You have fish that maybe roam a whole shoreline or a bay, but at some point they tend to gravitate back to that dock, whether it's when the sun gets up or whether it's when, conditions get nasty. It's just one of those things that they use as a home base. So I absolutely love an isolated dock, and I've talked a lot about that before on the channel. So that would be the first piece of cover, and that's pretty much regardless of where I'm at in the country. Another one would be a really defined rock edge. So then this is not necessarily just the transition from, say, a small rock to a big rock. I like a really abrupt edge that goes from rock to like mud or sand, just a complete change in a transition. So if I can find that, generally speaking, there's fish that relate to that edge. And the thing with that is when you do find a really defined rock edge, generally speaking, it's not just 10 feet long. A lot of times that edge will go for a long period of time, a long distance. It may be, 100 feet, it may be 100 yards. And it just is one of those things. The fish will find that hard edge and they'll use it like a highway. And because of that, if you know where that edge is, generally speaking, that's a really good place to fish. If I had my choice, I would be targeting spotted bass or smallmouth with those edges. Largemouth utilize them as well, but I for smallmouth and spotted bass, it's almost a no-brainer every time. The thing is, it can be hard to find those edges. Like if you're on a lake like in the Ozarks, you can find them, but it's almost like there's so much rock that you don't have that really abrupt change. It seems like it's a little bit more on your natural bodies of water where you find this just straight rock edge. It's a unique feature, but when you find it, it's almost a home run every time. So that's a second place. A third, and this is one of my favorite things to do, is if you can find cut up grass, floating grass. Oh, it could be leaves. It could basically any floating material that floats up against seawalls. So you have, enough water for a fish to be tight against that seawall. It could be a foot of water, it could be 4 feet of water, but if you have chopped up grass or chopped up debris, sometimes if you have flooding conditions, you could have like those sawdust mats. If you have that where it floats up against a hard wall, which is generally a seawall, it could be like a corrugated, like a barge tie up type thing too. Basically, I just want a vertical wall with that mat blown up against it. I love to punch that stuff. That is almost I mean, it's not always, but I mean, it is one of the best places to pull up, catch a fish. Generally speaking, I don't want 100 yards of it. I want like the corner of a seawall where you've got like 5 feet worth of floating debris in that corner. Those can be just home runs. They can be a blast to fish too, because you get to pull out the heavy flipping stick. But that is something that if I see, very, very hard for me to pass up. The fourth type of location that I love to fish, and this is much more on your rivers. It does happen in some instances with reservoirs or lakes, where you have water fluctuation. But I love to fish cut banks. Cut banks meaning you've got, again, it's almost like you've got a little bit of a vertical shoreline, but the water is actually eroded away underneath that shoreline, so the fish can tuck up underneath that bank. Much more prevalent on places with current and rivers, but you do get it in a lot of instances with natural lakes where you have water fluctuation, and if you have some trees or bushes, you'll have it where you can have that in a lake as well. But those cut banks are awesome. The fish will tuck up under it, use it as an ambush location, use it to get out of the sunlight. And generally speaking, it's not like they can get back 10 feet under the cut bank. It's enough where they can just tuck up under. You've got some grass coming off the bank or some little bushes. The fish just love to utilize them, and that's one of the places that I love to fish. Grab a swim jig, grab maybe a flipping bait, and just go to town on those cut banks. It's a great fun way to fish. And then the fifth spot that I'm going to mention today that I have a really hard time passing up is just a bridge piling. Uh, and when I say bridge piling, not all bridges have pilings in the middle of the bridge, but I love to fish bridges. They're fish magnets year round, whether it's the piling itself or the corners of the causeway where the bridge is. A lot of times you have current that's going through those areas. A lot of times you have a kind of a deep blowout hole that generally congregates bait. They're just high percentage locations for all species of bass. And it's one of those places that is a travel route. It is a highway. So they get a lot of pressure. You have a lot of shore fishermen, you have a lot of other anglers that know all about it. But generally speaking, you have a lot of fish migrating through those bridge areas. And because of that, they continue to replenish. And because of that, you could pull up behind a guy who's just fished it and start catching fish. So for me, it's one of those things. A lot of times, assuming it's not a giant bridge, you can fish them pretty quick. You can pull in, you can hit the main spots, you hit the corners, you hit the bridge pilings, then you move on. But a lot of times you have some really good quality fish that hang out around those bridges just based on the fact that they are a travel route, as well as the fact that you have a ton of bait around generally, and that just makes them a really good place to fish. So those are five locations I have a really hard time passing up when I'm on the water, whether I'm fun fishing or whether I'm in tournament situation. I'm going to check out all of those locations if I happen to see one. So let me know in the comment section, what is like one location that you guys have a hard time passing up because of how good you think the spot can be based on the experience that you'd have. I'd love to see that from you guys. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you are not a subscriber, that's very appreciated. And stay tuned, we'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.